Hi, I'm Luke Gallant. You might remember me from YouTube videos such as the YT624EJ maintenance channel or random GoPro videos with 6 views. I'm here again with the Husqvarna 2022 TE250i I on a mission of a proper power characteristic. Last time I had this on the channel, it was all about the front brakes and how brake tech didn't do such a great job. And now I had to open my wallet and let more money flow out of it to make that right. Since I've made that video, I've put in a set of MX Tech Ravens, which I'm very near perfection on it, and a bladder kit in the back shock so that I can get normal suspension. Well, I say normal, good, but maybe on par with the stock KYB on the Yamaha, but I digress. Now I'm on a different mission, and the reason I'm making a video is probably to make myself feel better about my investment, or should I say expenditure. I might have mentioned it on the other video, maybe not, that I do not like, absolutely do not like the 0 to about 20 to 25% throttle point on these bikes, or on this bike rather, which I read as a common complaint. The reason I don't like it is because when you're riding single track and you're trying to coast in second or third gear, you don't want to be above 25% throttle to get that power, nor do you want to be blip, blip, blip. It's nice to be able to keep on the throttle steady, and it's also nice that when you touch the throttle, you get response out of the bike. I think that one of the contributors to this might be the red Loctited idle screw that's in the throttle body, which Slave-Ins and other companies sell kind of a replaceable idle screw that you can adjust the position of the throttle body flap, because adjusting the air mixture screw doesn't work very well. I know that that's a possibility, but I actually gave in a YOLO type moment that I don't experience very often, and bought the TSP ERM as well as the TSP medium compression head. So I'm gonna make this video just to showcase how to get it installed, the first setup, and then my first experience with it, kind of a first ride of the year. Now, we're at the end of February now, so I'll install this over the next few weeks. And after that, I'm gonna get the whole bike ready. I'm gonna go for a first ride on GoPro and kind of film first impressions. Now, as I do that TSP work, I'm gonna be disassembling kind of the entire bike for suspension servicing and all other maintenance. So this assembly is not just for the TSP. So I'm not gonna tell you how to get to your head or how to get to your, it's gonna be focused on the TSP and that work. It's not gonna be how to take your gas tank off, etc. I mean, if you're watching this video, you probably know how to do that, or if you don't, read the manual. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let's get going. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. So I'm already well underway in the maintenance for this winter on the 2022 Husqvarna TE250i I. I've got the front and rear suspension off, sent away. I'm in process of doing all the linkage bearings, etc., suspension bearings, but that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm gonna continue on with the TSP ERM and the TSP head kit and the adjustable idle screw. I'm gonna show you guys those parts, but before I get to installing them, I'm gonna continue dismantling just the upper stuff here. I'm gonna get a compression test, which is part of my maintenance. I'm gonna record that. We'll do it again after the head's been installed. So here I'm going to show you what's in the TSP kits. So the first TSP box is what's called here the ECU Reflash Module, which is the ERM. I'm just going to go through the contents. There's 2 stickers, which is good. Otherwise, big fail. There's a small instruction sheet, which I'm going to be going through, and I'll summarize as I make this video. A couple protective foams. There is a BPR8 EIX spark plug. There's a QR code for getting help. There's the TSP ERM mounting hardware kit, so it's some sticky backs and some other stuff. There is a special USB cable that seems to have like a 6-pin out. Then there is the adjustable screw, which just seems to be like an M6 bolt with a spring. So that's that. And then finally, most importantly, there's the ERM module itself, which is a small screen with a couple connectors, 2 of them. So it's connector 1, 2, and 3. One's a 6-pin. The other looks like would be a 2-pin and a 2-pin. So we're gonna get into using this. Now, the other TSP box is called the billet 2-piece cylinder head, and this is again for the 250. It's a medium compression head. So there's a bag here with some copper washers and what appears to be 2 O-rings. Then there is the billeted head here, which we're going to see in more detail after. And then there's the medium compression insert. So the insert goes within the billeted head for installation. So we're going to be doing all that. So here we go. I'm going to start dismantling. I'll come back for the compression checks, and then we'll forge on with installation of all the hardware. I'll take some compressed air and blow all the dust and the dirt away. Then wash with the cloth, do it again, make sure this area is spotless to work on this stuff, in my opinion. So here we've got the BR7 EIX that I had put in to try and deal with some of the plug fouling issues. So here we have a manual focus on that spark plug. It's pretty rich, it smells rich. This is how it was left at the end of the season. So anyway, we're going to see in the future what the new revised setup. By the way, for those that are curious, here's the difference between the two plugs. So the oily one is the BR7 EIX and the other one is the BPR8 EIX, so the projected tip. So kind of on a, you can see there, the height's kind of the same, but as it indicates, the tip is more projected, including the ground electrode is also more projected. So it's a pretty easily discernible difference there. You can see kind of a side-by-side comparison. So good information there. I've got here an OTC compression tester for the record. I'm going to set that down here. I'm going to hold the kill button. I'm going to put the throttle wide open and crank. I have 185 PSI. I'm going to try that again. 185 PSI. Now for myself, last year I put on 42 hours and the compression at the end of last year is exactly the same as what it is now. So I've lost no compression over the 2023 season, which is awesome. All right, we got three main tasks. Number one is getting the existing head off and getting the new one on. Once that whole job's done, we have to reprogram the ECU using the ERM, and then the third thing we're going to do is get the throttle body idle screw changed. So we're going to start with the head. I'm going to start by getting the battery disconnected. Now we want to disconnect the battery, the negative terminal of the battery, so that obviously we don't start the bike by accident when our hands are in there. Next thing I want to do is drain the coolant. I use these Tropicana clear containers for a lot of obvious reasons. You want to make sure you got the copper O-ring on there, it doesn't fall into the jug. I'm going to push in on that drain bolt to keep it sealed, and then right at the end we're going to pull it out, and then what we're going to do is open the cap up top to get that coolant flowing, and there we go. I'm going to be reusing this coolant. So I like the plan for success. I'm going to retorque this bolt up right now, 89 inch-pounds. 89. So now that the coolant's drained, I'm going to undo the motor mounts from the sides of the head. The next thing I want to do is remove the coolant temperature sensor, which is on the back here. So I've never taken this thing off. We're going to want to pull the boot up and up and up from this side. Then we can push the tab on the connector, and there we have it. Looks good inside. I'm going to stuff that somewhere where it's going to stay. Now that is there. We're going to have to transfer this. And now we've only got the one coolant hose on the front. So with a 6mm or a Phillips, I can get in there and undo the, I can undo that. What I'm going to do, so for my super anal retentive tendencies, I'm going to get in there with the ubiquitous tool in here. And I'm going to put a Sharpie line to show where exactly it's there, so that when I put it back on, I know what kind of tension I got to put on there. It's a 6mm, and not tightened very tight either, by the way. I got the spark plug wire here. I'm going to move, put that up there, and the hose. I can move the clamp. I'm going to move the hose, and I'm going to clear that out of the way. Here we go. Now I'm going to use a 13mm socket and get these bolts off. All right, Alright, so I put 2 head bolts back in only to get this coolant sensor off. It's a 17 millimeter. Alright, so it's coming up. Now remember, it's doweled in there too, so try to get it out straight up. So here we have the inside of the cylinder, and the piston's about halfway. So I'm gonna have to try and rotate things to get the piston in top dead center position. So here we have the piston in the top dead center. We're gonna go ahead and make it do another revolution here. Now I'm in second gear, pulling on the chain here. Try not to get my finger pinched. All right, so what we want to do now is take a sharp pick and get the these O-rings out. And take a alcohol-soaked Q-tip. So clearly, you want to make sure there's nothing of contaminants in here, otherwise you're not going to get a good seal. All right. So we're going to lay the exterior gasket in. All right, so one of the things we're going to do first is take all these copper washers off the bolts and replace them with the new ones so that we don't forget. All right, so what the instructions here from TSP say to do is to make sure that the O-ring on the insert is in its proper location, which it is. Now to me, just to make sure there's no dust and stuff sitting on there, I'm going to give it a little white. With these Q-tips, we always try to make sure there's no hairs left behind, which there are not. Now by the way, this is KTM 250 V2. It says 13.6 M and 1.2 squish minimum. So what I'm going to do now is put the insert into the head and not force it, just let it kind of rest. It's going to just drop in there. There we go. And then what it says to do is to take the spark plug and put it in there finger tight. So what I'm going to do now is take the rubber protector from the spark plug, transfer it, and again this is the BPR8EIX. We're going to put it here, and what the spark plug is going to do is hold the insert in there. And now we can see what that looks like from the inside, and we can see the coolant passages around there. So you want to make sure that this is really, really clean on all sealing surfaces. We see there's the 2 dowel holes. Just to make sure, we can see that this sensor is going to go in here after the fact. So I'm going to put that in after. All right, so we can see that the O-ring is laid in there properly and that it's clean. Just going to make a final pass here to make sure that we've got nothing laying on it. We see that the 2 dowels are in place. We're going to start with a progressive torque all the way up to the 27 Newton meters specified in the book. We're going to start at about 13 Newton meters crisscross pattern, and we're going to keep increasing by say 5 or 7 Newton meters till we get up there, maybe in 3 increments. So I'll do this at high speed and I'll go in with the bigger torque wrench for the final torque. We're now going to reinsert the temperature sensor. There we go, just snug. All right, going to tighten that back down now. There we go, same place as last time. And then we are going to plug this back in. So before we go and push the electric start button to either test the compression or start it back up, You want to make sure that the piston can move freely in the cylinder and nothing bad has happened up top that we got no jamming, because if you got jamming and you go on the e-start, something's going to break. So what I'm going to do is put this shorter pencil down in the cavity. I'm going to grab the chain down here, and I'm going to, I got the bike in second gear, and without getting my fingers caught in there. So here we see that we are approaching the bottom, and we see it come back up. So we know that we're not jammed in there now, which is excellent. So what I'm going to do now is temporarily reattach the battery, check the compression, report back what it is for an apples to apples or apples to oranges, if you will. All right, compression check, same process. 210 PSI. That's 210 PSI with the TSP. So we've just picked up a 30 PSI compression increase. Finally, we're going to put the spark plug in. This is the spark plug that came with the TSP kit, the BPR8E IX. All right, so I've got a semi-patented wrench that I've modified here. So I've put a screw up here, and I've got a calibrated torque value of 115 inch-pounds. So I got my calibrated torque wrench, and then I got the small torque wrench. And the way I've done this is calculate the effective torque. I put both together at 115 inch-pounds, which is about half the torque value. And then I can apply the torque knowing that it's increased. There we go, I'm done. All right, I want to go through something that most people might know, but if you don't know, it's good that you learn this because you can run into trouble because of this. So this pivot bolt that goes on the back of the engine, joining the frame, the swing arm, and the engine, it can develop alignment issues. And I think it develops alignment issues because some of the motor mounts can shift over time, and then one day you'll take this pin out. First of all, it's going to be very, very hard to remove, and not because it's seized there rusted, unless you're one of those guys that didn't grease it ever, but that's your thing. But you might find that it's stuck in there, and then when you go to put it back in, you'll find that it goes in and then it stops. And do not hammer this pin in, please, for the love of God. The way to alleviate this, and I've encountered this on previous bikes, is to loosen the rest of the motor mounts, put the pin in, and then tighten the other mounts back up. So right now we've got the two motor mounts up top that are out because of the head, which is a good time to do this. I'm not going to show the camera angle, but there's a bolt here and there's a bolt here accessible from the other side. I'm going to go over there, just loosen them a little bit, don't need to take the bolts out. I'm going to come back, I'm going to stick this pin in. I might have to lift the engine a bit, get the pin in all the way through. I'm going to leave it in there loose, no swing arm, nothing. I'm going to tighten the bottom two bolts. I'm going to put the mounts up top and I'm going to tighten them. And I'm not going to tighten them until I put the exhaust in later on, because the exhaust also carries alignment up there. So you want to kind of fit everything at the top. But I'm going to leave this pin in, and then I'm going to make sure I have optimal alignment and smooth pivot shaft. All right, here we go, 13 millimeter for both bolts. We loosen. All right, now that we've loosened that, the engine is free to move in the carriage here. So I'm going to stick this bolt back in, and I should be able to lift the engine. There we go, perfect. There, that is perfect now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this pin in there. I'm going to leave these two loose, and when I put the two mounts up top, I'm going to tighten everything, and I'll actually look in the manual before then to see what order. But if this pin doesn't go in, this is what you got to do. Don't smash it in. Okay, we're going to proceed now to the ERM. Here we go. All right, so I did all the steps up till time 8:45 in the TSP ERM Quick Start Guide. Now I'm going to show this part live. So I've just plugged the ERM module into the ECU, and I'm ready to pair. As the video says, you can only pair with one device. So I'm ready to pair this ERM to my bike. So pair to ECU, I'm going to say OK. So what the video says is that the ERM is now taking a download of the map off the ECU. So let's pair to my bike. So I'm going to disconnect the ERM now and plug it back to the computer so I can use the Wi-Fi to download the backup. So when I open the ERM manager, I can wait for the device Wi-Fi to pop up, and then I connect to my ERM. And once I'm connected there, I know it's very tiny here, but I can go over to the maps, and I've got my original map, my customer backup. So now I'm going to download the backup, and I can save it to my folder. So this is my original map backup. Now that I know that my ECU is preserved, so I can then go back on the bike and download the TSP tuned map to the ECU. Okay, so now that I've got the backup downloaded, I'm going to go into the tune settings. I've hooked this back up to the bike, and it says choose a map to begin tuning. And then go down, select the TSP1, select it. Frankly, I don't know the difference. I'm going to say basic. So I guess now I can select between map 1 and map 2, but I want map 1 with the TSP preset. So to me, that TSP preset is good. I don't want to play with those settings right now. If I choose Pro, I'm left with some options I don't really feel like playing with right now. So I'm going to go back to the basic TSP map. I'm going to hit select. I'm going to hit basic mode. I'm going to leave all that stock on my map 1. I could select richer, leaner, softer, or custom. So I don't want leaner right now. If I choose leaner, that's what I have, a lot less fuel. If I choose richer, I have a lot more fuel. And then if I have softer, I got more fuel, less ignition. Then custom, obviously I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to go TSP, basic, 0, across the board. Now here I can see when I zoom in, I have throttle position and RPM. It looks a lot like the Yamaha, but a little pricier. So finally, 0 across the board. I'm going to hit flash, moment of truth. I apparently accept all liability for damage or loss, which doesn't make me feel very good. That's why I got it on video. Here we go. Completed. So I guess every time I'd want to change some of the parameters, I'd have to set it up and then download it. Here I can play with my throttle, for example, and see what's going on.
Alright, so for this part of the video we're going to go about it a little bit differently. I didn't have my microphone turned on with my camera, so all this video has no audio. So in order to get the throttle body out, we're going to have to get the subframe tilted up, which is described in the manual. So what I'm doing here is there's 4 bolts. I'm taking the 2 bottom ones out, and then the 2 top ones I've loosened, and then that allows the subframe to be tilted upwards, and you can attach it with a string. So the subframe won't move up, however, until you get the throttle body boot, or the boot off the throttle body rather, which is what I'm trying to do right now, and it took me quite a long time. So I'm going to fast forward here and cut to where there's a little more action. So after struggling trying to get the boot off and not being able to, I decided to take the throttle position sensor off. So there's 3 screws there, Torx and a security Torx, and once you get that off, you can let it hang there. Now I continue to struggle with getting the boot off. Finally I get it off, and then you can see here when the subframe goes to move up, you have to unplug the ECU, otherwise there's way too much pressure on that. So unplug the ECU very, very carefully and never force anything with those connectors. And then once the subframe moves up, you can take a piece of string and tie it up to your handlebars so that it stays out of your way and doesn't fall on you when you're working in there. So that's what I'm doing here with this piece of string. Okay, so now it's time to get the throttle body out, and the only thing tying in there is the 2 throttle cables. So we'll take the cover off by taking that small Torx screw off, and then from the top the cover will pop off. It'll just pull towards you, and then in my case it wasn't coming off because there's lots of sand in there. So from the top, just try to pull it off gently, and then it's clipped on the bottom and it'll just pull off quite easily. Once it covers off, I would label the cables 1 and 2, and I'd write on the throttle body 1 and 2. And then I would also write where the metallic ends go into the plastic circular thing. I'd put 1 and 2 on there with a silver marker, and I've done that when I've reassembled it. So get these cables out, and you also don't want to move the nuts up or down on these cables too much. You just want to get them off and then put them back as they were. If you start playing with the nuts, then you're going to affect the position of the cable within the housing.
Gonna get the oil line off now. Here we go now, pulling the throttle body out. So we're going to give the throttle body some rubbing alcohol. Before we do that, we're going to spray it down a little bit with air. Alright, so now that we've given the throttle body a good cleaning, we can just actuate it and make sure that it opens and closes smoothly. So the screw that we want to change here is the idle screw, and it's that fixed screw that's in. So apparently this thing will be red Loctited in, and the only way to get it out is to apply some heat to melt the Loctite. It's a 2.5 millimeter Allen. It's going to go in from this end, and you'll see how much the engagement is. It's important to make sure the Allen key is all the way in there. So what I'm going to try to do now is to put the Allen key in and make sure it's all the way engaged and try turning it and see what happens. No, yeah, that's super stiff in there. I see I can get a bit of movement, but I see that the Loctite at the back is bunging it up in there. So you definitely don't want to overstress this. So what I'm going to do now is take my soldering iron out, and I'm going to apply heat to this to try and melt the Loctite. So we're going to use Old Faithful. It's a Weller 140 watt iron because my pen iron can't get in there too good. So what I'm going to do is go into the Allen head like this. First I'm going to wipe the solder off there when it gets hot. I'm going to go into the Allen head and heat the bolt so that the heat goes down into the set screw. Then I'll get out of there and try to undo it. So there's our screw. One of the steps that maybe didn't catch on camera is that prior to putting the screw in, I just cleaned the threads out with this M5x8 tap to make sure that any residual Loctite and debris was out of there. Then blew it out and then put the screw in there with the spring. And if you look at the description, I've put a link to a screw and a spring off McMaster Carr if you want to make your own of these instead of buying the Slavens one, which is a good product I'm sure, but this will give you an option for much cheaper. Alright, so I've gotten the inside of the boot cleaned, I've gotten the back side of the boot cleaned, I've got things ready. I'm going to put the throttle body back in, and then I'm going to move the camera over and start putting the cables back in, etc. Here we go. Alright, after futzing with it a little bit, this cable here is the first to go in, and it goes on the inside here. And the second cable is the second to go in and goes on the outside. So you got to have a little bit of slack in your cables, and then you tighten up these top nuts, and you need to absolutely make sure that the cable always, you need to make absolutely sure that the throttle always snaps back on its own. And make sure that this is tight. There you go. There you go. Okay, so this cover's got to get shaved down a little bit because with the new screw, the cover won't fit on. So I'm gonna put a hole in here gently in the vise. All right, with a stepped bit and a sharp knife, I managed to get that done. So again, Loctite on this small bolt. I'm gonna get this cover on. I'm going to go ahead now and plug this ECU connector back in very gently and make sure that it's straight. Gonna look inside, make sure there's no dirt and that we're not picking up any dirt. Make sure there's no dirt in the pins. That's installed. What we're going to do now is tighten these bolts. We got 30 Newton meters. So after I got everything back together, I wanted to do an oil pump prime test. The oil pump prime test is described in the manual. It's on so many YouTube videos. When I went to do it, it didn't work. And then I was kind of stumped, and I feared that my ECU may be bricked. And so I reflashed the stock one, still didn't work. And then I was browsing the TPI forum, and people were talking about the fact that the ECU needs to see that the throttle position is between a certain value, otherwise it won't start the oil pump priming process. I actually reached out to TSP on this one, and they responded back that with the ERM, you can look at the absolute throttle position, and it has to be between 12.5% and 13.9%. So if the absolute throttle position is within that position, and you would set that using the new adjustable throttle position screw, the idle screw. Now for myself, I tried setting it back to what it was set to before, but I also removed and put the TPS right off the side of the throttle body. So using the ERM, get the percentage in that range, then the test should work. So it did work for me. I kind of arbitrarily did it. I didn't use the ERM because I didn't know about it then. But TSP responded quite quickly. So closing notes, what I did is I numbered the throttle cables 1, 2, and put 1 and 2, and then I put 1 and 2. Now for my case, the total amount of oil that came from the pump priming sequence is about 5.5 milliliters, and that matches what I had in the past. So I'm okay with this. It's all good for me. On the rotating bit, and then what I did is I added a tiny bit of blue Loctite to the screw because I felt the threads were a little bit loose in the body, and I don't want that thing coming out. It's going to be obvious if it starts coming out because your idle is going to go down, etc. So what we're going to do now is get the coolant back in, and I'm going to do a pressure test on the coolant system just to make sure that O-ring is properly sealed down in the engine. It'd be a good idea to clean the debris out of this. Now if you haven't torqued that drain bolt for the coolant, now's the time to do it. I did it before. So what we're going to do first is test this cap. This cap is 1.8 bar. So I'm going to put this on my MIDIVAC tester. 1.8 bar is 26 psi. So what we're going to do is pressure this up to 26 psi. There we have the cap releasing at about 25 psi. So close enough. And now what I'm going to do with the coolant full, I'm going to pressurize this up. I don't really want to go too high. I'm going to shoot for about 26 and then call it a day. Alright, so after a bit of finagling, I come to realize that this cap doesn't fit as well from the MIDIVAC onto the KTM. So I put a little 1mm sheet of rubber in there to get a better seal and put the cap on just so. I'm going to pressurize up now. And our cap is rated for 26 psi. So the system has to be able to sustain at least that much, and we should be able to go above that. So I'm going to hold that at 25. What we're going to do is look for leakage. So right now those two O-rings that are in the head are being subjected to this pressure from the inside. I don't see any change in the needle at all. You can kind of hold it there for a few seconds longer. Looks good to me. Just going to put the cap back now. Okay, so what KTM calls the idle screw is actually the air screw, and then the new idle screw is underneath for the throttle stop position. So what TSP says is to set this to 3.5 turns out. So I've checked my stock configuration and it's 3.5 turns out. So my plan that I was gonna put the idle screw back to where it was and then see if the problem of poor throttle response off idle is still there, has fallen apart. This is already at 3.5 turns out, so I'm already the TSP away. What I'm gonna do now is just set the idle with the idle screw, and in my mind the thought that it could have just been the idle screw is no more. So my idle was already set to about 1450 RPM pre-TSP, so my idle was fine. I thought that maybe the idle screw is set to something like 2 turns out, and that the new idle screw would have compensated for this by getting me back to the right error lead, but that's not the case. So anyway, good to know. I've set this back to 3.5 turns out. There's a paint mark on there, and I'll set the idle once I get the thing started on the next video. So the only other thing from TSP is they say to have the power valve adjustment turned in 1mm. Now mine's in at about 1.5, I think. So I'm not going to touch it because that's not where my area of concern lies, but that's the final instruction of the TSP kit for this bike, is to have the 1mm setting. All right, so we got the TSP head with the medium compression insert installed, pressure tested. We've got the ERM that has reflashed the ECU and have done the oil priming task. And I had the idle screw put into the throttle body. Hopefully you found some use of all this. Now my bike has no suspension and I can't take it out for a ride. I don't want to start it inside. So that'll be the end of this video. The next video is going to be the startup and the initial first ride down the road, like the initial quick impressions. And then the final video is going to be first impressions of riding around in some trail and seeing if that empty bottom portion of the throttle is addressed with these modifications. Overall, I think the TSP stuff is really well put together. The only thing I got caught up with is not knowing that the priming procedure wouldn't work with the revised idle screw. So that's the only thing. The ERM is super slick. The sight is super slick. Anyway, recommended so far. The only thing I'm not showing here is how to get the motor mounts put back on, but it's pretty direct. I think the part about the swing arm is the most important one. And I don't want to put the top motor mount on until I put the pipe on at the end. And I'm not going to put the pipe on until I put the rear shock in, so on and so forth. So in the next video, the bike's going to be together. But for now, thanks for watching, and more to come.